there's certainly nothing that happens where you like wake up and you're 40 years and a day old and all of a sudden it's like, oh, my metabolism's shot. I can't burn fat anymore. That's not the case. Metabolism is really a reflection of your internal health and physiology. Metabolism is adaptive, which means it can change. It's malleable. It's not this fixed thing. It's not necessarily broken, but more often than not, healthy lifestyle and making the right choices with our nutrition and training, it's like the most powerful drug that they just can't put in a bottle and sell. And the hardest thing is really you have to be consistent with it over a long time horizon.
What's going on, friends? Welcome back to a brand new episode of Dieting from the Inside Out. If you are new here, welcome to the show. My name is Jared Hamilton, and I'm so excited that you're in the house. If you're watching the YouTube video, background is a little bit different than normal, but I'll explain that later. Today, I have a really cool episode for you. I have on one of the masters of metabolism. I have on Sam Miller. Now, if you don't know who Sam Miller is, you're about to, because he is a powerhouse and a genius and like the GOAT when it comes to all things metabolism. Because here's the reason why I wanted him to come on and what we got into in today's interview. I wanted there to be no misunderstanding around what it takes to actually make your metabolism to get you to where you want to be, to lose the weight, to keep it off without having to starve yourself, and to make this journey of changing your life, losing those 30 to 40 pounds, really not that big of a deal. And so we get into a lot. Sam breaks down metabolism as a whole, so you really understand what your metabolism is conceptually. He breaks down some of the common misunderstandings around metabolism. He talks about the average person who just struggles to lose weight, where you're going wrong with your metabolism and what you need to do in order to fix it if it isn't in a very good place. But then also he shares and really gets into why going through maintenance periods is so pivotal for your metabolism if you want to keep your weight off long term. And we get into so many different things in this episode around how to maximize your metabolism and really the truth behind it, and to make it where fat loss doesn't suck so much. So I won't take up any more of the intro. That is what we're going to get into with Sam. Now, before we do that, big thank you to the sponsors of the show. Sponsor number one is Flex Pro Meals, because it just makes food way easier with this fat loss stuff. Because at the end of the day, your life is crazy. My life is crazy. There's unpredictable stuff going on. There's always chaos. There's always things happening. And having food ready to go that's in line with your goals in your fridge at all times just makes things a lot easier. So if that's your cup of tea and you would really like to streamline and simplify your meal decisions and meal making for your goals, definitely check them out at either flexpromeals.com or hit the link below. But if you use my code HamiltonTrained, it'll save you 20% at checkout. And if you're listening to this during the month of October, it's actually 40%, which is pretty cool. Second sponsor is First Form. Now, we talk about it all the time that supplements are not the end all be all. Like the supplements should not be a big make or break thing for you. Your program should not be predicated only on supplements, but they do have their time and their place if you're not getting what you need from food. If you're not getting enough protein, if you're not getting enough vitamins and minerals, if you're not getting enough omega-3s, things like that. If you need a little pep in your step because coffee's just not doing it for you, whatever it may be, recovery sucks, anything like that. If you're not getting those gaps filled with food, this is where we look into supplements. But the problem is not all supplements are created equal. You should not be just going onto Amazon, finding what's cheapest and the least shittiest tasting. Okay. So that's why we work with First Form, because I want to make sure if you're going to be spending your money on supplements, I want it going to the best places so you get the products that you deserve for your money. I don't want you just wasting more money on Walmart bullshit or stuff that's just not serving you. That's not the best quality. So that's why we work with First Form. So I think they have some free shipping stuff going on right now, but definitely check out the link below if that's what you're looking for, or there's even a YouTube video if you're not quite sure where to get started, where I walk you through it. But otherwise, that is it for the sponsors. Now let's get into the episode with Sam. I know you'll get a lot out of this. So for those that don't know, like, who you are, give a little bit of backstory of who Sam Miller is.
For sure. So I have been working in the health and fitness industry as both a nutrition coach and mentor for over 15 years now. And my background really just started like many health and fitness professionals. And it was really just my own transformation, and also inspired by some folks in my life who were not in the best state of health when I was in my teens. And so those factors kind of started to lead me down the rabbit hole, started to have an interest in personal training and nutrition. And all throughout college, that was kind of my side hustle. I would work and train people and be on the gym floor as just kind of basic gym supervisor, cleaning treadmills, really kind of modest beginnings in the fitness industry. And as much as, I had a passion for it at that stage in my career, the people around you, your friends and family, a lot of people think that, training or coaching people is not really a real job, right? So, you go home for Thanksgiving and they're like, how long are you going to do this whole trainer thing? You're really going to be a coach for the rest of your life. So that's really where I started. And then through a combination of my own health journey and then also working with other people and realizing the needs were far greater than just counting sets and reps and getting people familiarized with calories and basic portion control, that sort of led me down the path to some of the more complex concepts that I talk about and the work that I do with nutrition, metabolism, and even some of the more functional health related concepts that people will apply. So I'm a big believer in taking a 360-degree approach to client transformation, which means instead of just looking at one sliver of your life and what you're doing in the gym, we really need to consider what's going on, throughout your entire life. And that includes your work, your family, if you're in school, or what is it like, as far as who cooks the meals at home? Are you someone who goes to the grocery store? Are you eating out a lot? All of these different factors go into your transformation, your stress levels. Are you inside a lot or are you outside a lot? There's so many things that we don't really think about. At least I'd say 10 to 20 years ago, the health and fitness industry did not really have those factors on the radar. It was like, here's your workout program, go do it. And then online coaching was kind of in its infancy at that time. So that's really where I started in the industry. And now today, recently released a book within the last year. And now my main focus is helping coaches through my continuing education programs, which we largely focus on nutrition and metabolism. I obviously emphasize fitness as well. It's just not something that necessarily is our only focal point, right? We just place a great emphasis on nutrition and metabolism because I think that's where a lot of the misinformation and poor education and internet arguments exist. And so we try to come in and kind of demystify a lot of those complex concepts for people.
I love that. That's amazing, man. I had my journey starting was the same way. It was a side hustle, just doing the in-person training thing until something cool happened. Family and friends were like, when are you going to get a real job? I've been there. I feel that into my bones, So for you, with all this stuff, you're so knowledgeable with all this much deeper stuff like metabolism, hormones, gut health, all the things. But for the normal average person, how do you bridge the gap between things that are this super in-depth and arguably overwhelming to where they're practical and sustainable for people? How do you bridge that gap?
I think it does depend on the person. And I think it's a coach's job to, clients, I don't want to say they're on a need to know basis, but there's a level of education and explanation that can help with the sustainability of the program. Because if someone understands the why behind something, it's kind of like, you understand how the clock works. There's 24 hours in a day. You have a better idea of how to budget your time if you understand the concept of time. If you don't understand the concept of time and I say, hey, Jared, it's a little after 4 when we're recording this, that may not make a ton of sense to you. So I try to provide enough education and context to where the things that we're doing from a program perspective are meaningful. We can assign meaning to those topics. Now with metabolism, gut health, hormones, how far we go down those rabbit holes may depend on the client's past health history. It's going to depend on their education level and really their desire to learn. So I'll share those things in a variety of different ways. I like to use stories and analogies to help explain complex things and break them down into kind of the key bullet points. And I find that jumping between this 10,000 foot view of here's kind of the big picture of things and then bringing it down to kind of the minutia or the weeds, just giving them just enough to understand these are key details that are important, but don't lose sight of the big picture. So let's say we're talking about gut health, for example. People will hear terms on the internet thrown around like intestinal permeability or dysbiosis. Well, I might not go into that if I have a client who doesn't have any digestive issues. I'm not going to talk about advanced things just for the sake of throwing them out there. And I think that's the mistake some coaches make is they want to use some of the terms because it sounds smart or it sounds impressive when the reality is it's the situational application of the knowledge you have that is really the separator. So if I'm working with a client and Debbie is struggling with her digestion, maybe I do need to provide some education around this is what good digestion looks like. This is how you should feel after your meals. This is what, even a healthy bowel movement looks like. So we're going to go to a depth that's appropriate for the client, based on both their health history and the current symptoms they're experiencing. That's kind of my approach. I know a lot of people will do it differently, but I don't think there's only one way to educate a client or to help them with the sustainability of all of it. But I do think stories, case studies from other clients, and the situational release of the knowledge that you have, because some people just dump on, it's like they ask one question about, maybe it's like, do you think I'm eating enough fiber? And then all of a sudden it's like you literally go into a dissertation about gut health that's like too much, right? So you got to be able to reel in a little bit. And then if someone asks for more, or you feel they need it based on their health history or their current quality of life and biofeedback, then by all means, dive in a little bit.
Yeah, I love that. So let me ask you this. So for those listening, like how would you explain to the average person, like what their metabolism is and why it's so important for that to be taken care of before they, let's say, dive into dive into a fat loss phase or something like that? Just to clear the air, how would you describe to the average person what your metabolism is?
So I view metabolism as an energy regulator, but also a gauge of stress in our lives as well. So it's sort of hedging against present and future stressors, while also taking into account, kind of has an inventory over our current health and some of our past decisions related to our health. So it's almost like your metabolism is this really cool combination. It's not just doing accounting, and it's not just this science thing that's going on in a lab. It's like it's able to understand that over time, you make repeated dietary decisions or repeated exercise decisions that will drive changes in your metabolic health. So for example, if I spend a decade building muscle, that's going to impact my metabolism. So when I say it has the ability to sort of gauge this stimulus, that's kind of what I mean. So metabolism is basically a combination of energy regulation for our body. Now, if you were to look up a definition in like a textbook, they would just talk about like the sum of all these reactions and things going on in the body, right? But I think what most people care about when they're on a health and fitness journey is, metabolism for the sake of changing my physique, my quality of life, my performance, or how long I'm going to live, right? I need to get metabolically healthier is how people say it. Or I want my metabolism to be faster so I can lose 10 pounds, or I want a healthy metabolism because XYZ. So they really use metabolism more as a descriptor in the role that it plays towards their goals. So that's why I use the frame of the two main pillars being stress and energy. And then really we're just sort of trying to gauge that and then appropriately sort of applying nutrition and applying training to a person's metabolism.
That makes a lot of sense. So let me ask you this, with people, like the average person, with what they see, whether it be on the ads they're targeted by, or the magazines in the checkout aisle at the grocery store, or whatever their friend Karen at the other side of the cubicle saying, where everyone's always in a state of, oh, I need to boost my metabolism. My metabolism's slow. I need to speed it up. What's your take on that side of things?
Yeah, that's definitely a very common concern from Karens and non-Karens alike. So I appreciate you bringing that up. So Karen at the cubicle worried about the speed of her metabolism. I think what we have to first understand is it's not necessarily just the speed of metabolism that's the only important thing. And usually when people are referring to that, it's because of the education around calories in and calories out, and they're worried about what's called their energy expenditure, or total daily energy expenditure, which is TDEE for all the health and fitness folks out there. So when we look at that, that's a combination of both our resting metabolism, our non-exercise activity, our exercise activity, and the thermic effect from the foods that we eat. So when a lot of people assign those words, my concern is it creates this fixed mindset around metabolism, like, oh, it's slow, it's fast, it's broken, it's on, it's off. And metabolism isn't binary like a light switch. It's really more of a gradient scale, like a dimmer dial. Or think about the radio in your car. Like, let's say your song comes on that you really like, you turn up the dial and you got the jams that you want while you're cruising down the street. Metabolism really exists more on kind of that dial versus the yes, no, fast, slow, on, off, etc. So one of the biggest problems is the industry is, the old education was very much like fast metabolism, slow, or you think about growing up in grade school, if you had a friend who was a little bit chubbier, it's like, oh, they have a slow metabolism, or Timmy's big boned. And it's like, no, we just have these factors that have contributed to our current state of metabolism. So for Karen, what I would first explain is metabolism is a byproduct of a lot of our past choices and health behaviors. And metabolism can be influenced by the current stimulus in our life, or our current decisions and our current choices. So I describe this using a number of different models in my teaching. But this is why getting a hold of your daily practices is so important. So the routines that you have, the rituals that you participate in, the way you take care of your time, and things like walking, strength training. The reason those are so important is that's that like present stimulus for your metabolism. So if you're looking to change your metabolism, or quote unquote, a lot of people, when they say speed it up, really what they mean is they want to increase their energy expenditure. You can do that through exercise, and you can also influence your metabolism and improve your state of metabolic health by making the right food choices. So things that improve your insulin sensitivity or reduce inflammation in the body, or we can do things in our lifestyle that help to manage stress. So for Karen, I would say, hey, Karen, what we need to pay attention to is not necessarily just the speed of your metabolism, but a combination of both your energy intake and your energy output, which is a combination of nutrition and the foods we eat. And it's also the activities that we participate in. And then on top of that, I'm going to describe how maybe some of our past choices, our past diet history, and all of these other factors play into the current state of our metabolism, and then where we go from here to kind of adjust that dial appropriately. Now, there are more advanced tests and things that you can do if you are concerned, or let's say someone has like a legitimate thyroid condition or something, right? You could go and assess factors that play into your energy expenditure. But for most people, it's simply creating an awareness through a food log and kind of beginning to track and have an idea of things like your daily step count or how active you are, and just getting, into the gym, doing some resistance training and things like that.
That's awesome. I love that. So for those that feel like their metabolism is, we'll just say, on the lower spectrum, like they're convinced it's one of those things where it's not good. They've been trendy dieting their whole lives, and they've been living in the eat less, move more world, where it's just like, I literally can't take calories lower. I can't add more stuff. Like for that person, what's the best approach to whether, is it something where the metabolism needs repaired, as clickbaity as that sounds? Is it something that work needs to be done around that to make it more conducive for, let's say, fat loss? Or what's your thoughts on that?
So what you're describing is sort of this phenomenon known as metabolic adaptation, and that can occur if we are chronically dieting, or basically we're reducing our energy intake and we're trying to, repeatedly lose body fat. And if we try to engage in that for a period of time and we truly get into a calorie deficit, there are metabolic and hormonal changes as a result. However, the mistake a lot of people make is they think that they're actually in a deficit when really they've just created a state of restriction. And because there's a perpetual attempt at restriction, there's not actually like a successful deficit that occurs. Now that can be confusing because in one regard, we're talking about portion control and calories, and the other component is really more the sort of psychological aspects of repeatedly dieting over a period of time. So before assuming if you like that you have some sort of metabolic adaptation, I would first think about, number one, the depth of your past diets, meaning how low did you go with your calories, and were you tracking your food when you did that? Number two, the duration of that diet. So it's very different for me to lower my calories and truly follow that for a very long period of time versus if I were to lower my calories, but I do it for 2 weeks. That's like a mini diet, right? Versus if I were to do it for 16, 18, 20, 24 weeks, that's a really long time. So we have to think about the depth, duration, and frequency of our dietary attempts. Frequency would be like you saw your favorite actress on a morning TV show and you did a diet that she talked about 1 week, and then a month later you're checking out this other diet, and then you hear, some lady in the office talking about she lost 10 pounds on this other diet. So you're constantly sort of diet hopping. That would be more like your frequency. Or, every year you always are dieting for summer, or you're always setting New Year's resolutions and you're repeatedly engaged in that stimulus without a lot of maintenance phases. So there are people, and there's research to support the idea that we can have some metabolic adaptation. This is a transient change, meaning it's a result of our choices and our decisions related to our food and our exercise. The good news is, because you played a role in creating that state, you can help to get out of it. So that's the good news. The bad news is sometimes it's frustrating, and we may have to create a level of awareness around what we were actually doing with our nutrition during that time, and what were we doing with our exercise. Were those actually productive exercise habits? Were we following the appropriate type of resistance training program, or were we just like, doing incessant amounts of cardio, hoping that we would lose weight? So there's a few things that we can do there to sort of manage this, but the situation you're describing, when someone sort of sees that on the internet and they think, oh, I need to repair my metabolism. Usually that's a person who's been dieting for quite some time. There is a possibility that metabolic adaptation has occurred, but in order to truly assess and audit that as a coach or health professional, or just someone who's trying to do this on their own and become more educated about the process, you would really need to be able to look at a food log and also understand the consistency of your energy output. So I would say there are plenty of people who have come to me over the years, or that I've helped through our programs and working with the coaches that we serve, where they legitimately were pursuing like repeated deficits for a period of time. And in many cases, they were successful in reducing their food a significant amount. But there are also a number of cases where people felt like they were dieting. They felt like they were in the state of restriction, but they would do things, whether it be on the weekends or they'd be consistent for 3 weeks. And then 1 week, they wouldn't be super consistent, where really their calories were not as low as they thought they were. And so it was less of a, hey, this is a metabolism issue. It was really more of a basic sort of health, fitness, nutrition, foundational concept related issue. But just to not poo-poo the idea of metabolic adaptation or anything like that, there are certainly individuals who, if you're that type A, burn the candle at both ends, high achiever, go, you love being on top of your fitness, you love exercising, and you're very diligent with your nutrition and you understand how to track, there are definitely, for sure, people who have done that. And really what they need is to spend some time at maintenance and focus on building muscle and a period of progressive overload and resistance training, along with fueling their body, because otherwise what happens is you have to diet on lower and lower and lower calories to successfully lose any body fat. And that also comes with the consequence of, lower micronutrient status, potential, higher stress, some gut issues, and the other things that we talked about. So our goal is not to diet and race to the bottom of as low as calories possible. So that's where the maintenance phase or the idea of nutritional periodization comes in.
I love that. I'm so glad you brought that up. One thing that I see a lot in the community, in our community, and the people that we serve, is when we approach maintenance, because I talk about maintenance all the time, big proponent of everything you just said. Now, we still see a lot of people that are just outright scared shitless to go into maintenance. They feel like it's like the worst thing ever, or they're convinced that it's not doing as much as we know it is. Could you touch on the metabolic benefits from your perspective of why maintenance is so important in keeping your caloric tolerance, if we want to call it that, as high as we can?
So there's a number of benefits. Number one, I think right away, you'll likely see some performance benefits in the gym, which feels good. I think if you're someone who likes to see results from your training and you really are driven by numerical progress, you'll feel really good and you'll feel really accomplished with the training sessions that you have when you are fueling at maintenance calories. Another benefit of maintenance calories is we kind of reduce that calorie gap or stressor that exists when we go into a deficit relative to where we maintain our actual weight. And by reducing that gap, that actually can be very helpful in terms of alleviating some of that hormonal and metabolic adaptation that we see from repeatedly pursuing that deficit. So that's really good on that side. I would say eating at maintenance calories, it's also more likely that you have the ability to fit in a number of foods that are micronutrient dense, which allows you to improve your overall health status. So frequently when we go into a diet, one thing we unintentionally do really is in reducing our portions, we reduce our macronutrient intake. And because a lot of us eat similar foods, really all we're doing is we're having smaller servings of the foods we were having before. And when you do that, you're subtracting micros as you're subtracting macros. And only if you're proactive with your supplementation, or you're really good at like, I'm going to rotate out this food and this carb has more micros, so I'm going to eat this instead. And most people don't eat like that. It's really like I was having 3/4 of a cup of rice and now I'm going to have half a cup of rice, right? It's like the basic portion sort of substitution, and they keep with their routines. So I'd say the additional benefit there is the micronutrient status. So if I had to prioritize, I'd say performance is a clear benefit. You are potentially alleviating some of the metabolic and hormonal adaptations that would occur with chronic dieting, and you're improving your micronutrient status, which is going to be great for your overall health, especially. So I know there are a lot of ladies that listen to this show, think like hair, skin, nails, all of those benefits can be good for your gut health as well. So micros are very important. They're often, underappreciated, but they go a long way in supporting your overall health, appearance, and performance in the gym.
I love that. I think a friend of mine she's a coach. She started talking about like maintenance periods. She started changing her terminology and calls them momentum building. And for a lot of her community, it has helped like change the meaning they associate with it. Like, oh, maintenance, I'm not doing anything beneficial versus it's doing a lot under the surface. And I think people forget that, you know?
Yeah, there's a lot going on underneath the hood during the maintenance phase. And I think people underestimate how much you can recomp during a maintenance phase. You can actually still build some muscle and lose fat. Now, will it be as extreme of weight loss as, you know, if you're hyperfixated on the scale, you may struggle with the idea of the maintenance phase. However, if you were to just look at progress photos, your dress sizes, body tape measurements, you'd be impressed at what a maintenance phase could do. I think a lot of people really underestimate, and they spend so much time going back and forth between like, oh, I'm in a surplus to build muscle, I'm in a calorie deficit, versus if they were to eat around maintenance, slight deficit or slight, you know, surplus, or just eat maintenance and consistently resistance train for a really long period of time, I think they would be shocked how much they could change their body. Especially if you gave it like, instead of months, you gave it like a couple years, you would look like an entirely different person, even pretty close to maintenance calories. Now, could you accelerate your fat loss by reducing your calories further? For sure. Oh, yeah, 100%. We know that we're going to lose more body fat when we reduce our energy intake. But I think if you were consistent with your resistance training, your walking, and you were eating nutrient dense whole foods for the bulk of your maintenance calories, I think you'd look pretty good and you'd be pretty impressed and surprised with your results.
For sure. For sure. Now, I know this is, again, super individual, but I've been hearing this in conversation a lot, and I'd be curious your take on it, being like the metabolism master, if you will. That's probably going to be in the title of this episode. But when it comes to maintenance periods, do you believe in a 1-to-1 ratio of, oh, if you've been deficiting for 12 weeks, you need a 12-week maintenance period, or do you believe it's not always a 1-to-1? What are your thoughts on that?
So I don't assign like set ratios or black and white rules for the analysis of the appropriate length of a maintenance phase versus diet phase. However, I do use some tools to help us unpack what is an appropriate length. I think for most people, a combination of biofeedback, quality of life, you know, things like their body composition, and then further, if you are working with a health professional who understands lab work or blood work, those can be key indicators. I've kind of talked about these before as like the 3 or 4 Bs. So we have body composition. You could use basal body temperature for women because that's a great gauge of both menstrual cycle health and thyroid health. And in addition to that, you have your blood work on there too. And so when we look at that and biofeedback in combination, we can really get an assessment of how is someone doing during this period of restriction relative to, okay, they've spent a lot of time at maintenance, because really our permission slip for that next diet phase is, you know, I'm sleeping great, you know, managing my stress pretty well. My training's going really well. I've managed my hunger. I've managed my recovery, and I have solid energy levels. Because if you're starting a diet and you have pretty low energy levels, you know, your digestion sucks. And I use an acronym called SHREDS to kind of help break this down, but it's basically sleep, hunger, recovery, energy, digestion, and stress. So if you run through that little checklist and you're like, you know what, I'm pretty good in all those areas, and I've been doing this for a period of time, you're probably in a place where you could begin to consider that transition. But I think a lot of people try to rush it, and whether that's 1-to-1 or 2-to-1, you know, they spend twice as much time dieting as they do at a maintenance phase because they want to diet and lose body fat. They jump the gun on the next deficit, and then they run into or encounter more problems with things like managing their hunger, or they're not recovering from their workouts, or their, you know, stress levels aren't great, so they're sleeping poorly. So we really want to run through that little checklist. And I use that instead of a single one size fits all recommendation of, oh, if you diet for X number of weeks, you need to be at maintenance for Y. And the other way to evaluate that is the little tool I mentioned earlier, where if you think about the depth, duration, and frequency of your diets, you can also think, okay, this is kind of what I've been doing across the recent past in terms of my nutrition. Maybe I need to spend that time at maintenance to get that biofeedback in check, regulate my hunger, you know, make sure everything's in a really good spot for when you do diet. Because if you're having a hard time with that, when you're not in a diet phase, it's only going to get worse and harder when you are in the diet phase. So no set ratios, just more so tools for evaluating what's best for you.
I love that answer. I was actually about to ask if you had like we'll call it a metabolism checklist for things like that. Now, do you use the checklist the other way as well, where like, let's say someone's has been in a deficit, but the signs of dieting are starting to show, like their sleep is starting to go south and hunger is getting out of control or things like that. Do you use that checklist the other way when it's time to go maintenance?
So I do use the Shreds biofeedback system, both in terms of dieting and at maintenance, and really in all phases. So I think it's something that could exist. And I talk about this in Metabolism Made Simple, but you could really use it to kind of check in with yourself or with your coach at any given time, regardless of your goal. You could want to be an athlete and you could check this biofeedback tool, or you could be someone who just wants to lose 5 or 10 pounds and you could use this biofeedback tool. Now, in a diet phase, what we're looking for, we know that biofeedback might not be perfect because we're reducing food, and food is like our key source of energy. So we're not going to be perfect there. I think if you go in with the expectation that you're going to do your entire diet and you're not going to have any changes in your biofeedback, that's kind of unrealistic. There's going to be times when you are hungry. There's going to be times when you may not sleep as well because your calories are lower. Now, if that goes to the extreme and your recovery is compromised and it's consistent, it's like repeated every single day across multiple weeks, and nothing that we do, like this is where you would try, maybe reducing your training intensity, or you try to give yourself a little bit more time to sleep, or you try to reduce your stress in other areas. You would try a couple things before you just abandon the diet phase.
Sure.
I think some people would jump out too fast. So I'd also look at, okay, am I hungry because of the meal composition of what I just ate? Or am I hungry because I've like literally run through all my macros and I have nothing left? Or even if let's say you're not like a huge macro person, but you know that you typically eat a given lunch or dinner and you're eating something very similar and you're hungrier. It's normal to be hungry during a diet phase. However, there are extremes that for the lifestyle client, we tend to avoid, right? Like we want to pursue fat loss to a degree that it's not so detrimental to the person's quality of life. Like we're not stepping on the Olympia stage. We need to be realistic about that. Now, if someone is an athlete and they have very high level performance goals, or they have very high level physique goals, there's going to be a greater discrepancy between like their optimal maintenance biofeedback and their biofeedback when they are 4% body fat, getting ready to compete. And I think that needs to be a very honest conversation. That's also one of the reasons why some of your favorite fitness models or bodybuilders, bikini competitors, there's performance enhancing drugs involved in that arena. So it's because the quality of life biofeedback and ability to perform decreases tremendously when you reduce food to a substantial degree. So I would say it is a signal. However, working with a coach or working with an expert can help you determine, all right, to what degree is this a problem? And do I need to just maybe deload for a bit? Do I need to take a day off? Or do I really need to just say, okay, I've been doing this for 24 weeks and I'm tapped out and I need to go back and raise my calories?
I like that. I really like the way that you approach that. And I think it's good, like that you mentioned, to have a realistic conversation between, like you said, a normal lifestyle person versus like a higher performance athlete or something like that, around what's actually realistic and practical,
Yeah. Cause if you can't go to work and like pay your bills because you're in a diet and you have your brain fog so bad, like if you're not competing as your way of making money, or you're not like prepping for a photo shoot at a very high level, then we probably need to evaluate, okay, this is probably gone to an extreme. And I think we could avoid issues related to dieting in our future body composition if we were able to kind of hedge against that. Now, the more experienced you are with nutrition and training, the more you can kind of mitigate that too. So I find that the people who are very in touch with understanding not only the importance of biofeedback and the use of the maintenance phase, they're also, they have the ability to understand how to regulate some of those things when they're dieting. So when you're dieting, you may be a little bit more stress reactive. You may tend to not sleep as great, right? So there's things we have to figure out. So maybe you find that when you're dieting, you need to adjust the size of your dinner meal to help support your sleep. That may be a change that you make that's best for you based on your past experience dieting. So in some ways, the tools are meant to inform good quality decisions about your health and what you're doing, but some people will get to a state of like analysis paralysis. And I try to prevent that by saying, like, I try to normalize certain things. Like, for example, in the diet phase, you may be hungry, or if you're at maintenance, here are some things that might happen. So with the tools, you also have to understand how to use them. And that's where, I try to coach people through that of, okay, this is where this would apply. And this is going to be, let's say your digestion super off or something like that. I'm going to explain, like, these are the things to look for. And it's not just on one day, it's like a repeated bout of the symptoms that you're experiencing.
No, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Now I know I'm going to get screamed at if I don't bring this up. And one thing I was wanting you to touch on, if you would, is the idea around that. As soon as someone hits the magic age of 40 or whatever the case is, it's like, oh, my metabolism was instantly shot in the head as soon as I reach such and such age. I'd love to hear your perspective on that, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, and maybe in just everything around that.
So I think people see changes in their overall metabolism, metabolic health, but not for the reason that people think. And it's not necessarily because of age. It's because our lifestyle changes with age.
Yes.
So whether that's a decrease in your activity level, or let's say you're 45, 50 years old and you had kids a little bit younger than some of your friends, maybe in your early 20s or mid 20s. Let's say your child is 18 years old and they're out of the house and you're no longer running the soccer practice and you're not going and making that extra trip to the store, walking around, getting a few thousand extra steps in. You're not going to these extracurricular activities. You're not like chasing a kid around at your house. Like if you have a toddler, you're probably getting a lot of extra steps, right? So there are lifestyle changes. We also tend to see if someone's not eating the appropriate amount of protein and resistance training, there will be a decrease in muscle mass. And then there are some hormonal changes, especially for women, that come as a result of perimenopause. Now, that can lead to significant amount of metabolic changes, but that age, there's no magical age where all of a sudden you're just like, oh, the word you used or phrase you used was like, oh, my metabolism shot, right?
Yep.
It's really more of a combination of factors, which is still very person dependent. Some people also retire in their 50s and 60s. When you retire, you're not going to work. You may not be active there. Maybe your zest for life has changed. Maybe you used to have some hobbies, or maybe you played in like a pickup sports league or intramurals, or you went to the gym more, you went to classes more. I don't really necessarily know for every single person that's listening to this episode, but it is safe to say that after our 20s and 30s, sometimes there are lifestyle changes that are impacting our energy expenditure and maybe even our stress levels. Maybe even though our worldview is changing as we're getting older, we might have stress from different sources. Maybe your children being a different age. Maybe you are a key caretaker for, maybe you have a relative who's older and not in a great state of health. So I see people in their late 30s, early 40s, and even in their 50s, there's life changes stemming from taking care of other family members. Maybe they're not prioritizing their own health because they are actively caring for an elderly family member that's in their life. I've seen that a lot. Stress and trauma that may stem from relationship changes, divorce, children leaving the home. There's a lot of things that happen during those. They're almost like another set of formative years beyond your adolescent years, right? So you have like your early adulthood, and then you have this whole other experience that's going on. Then for men, we do sometimes see a decline in testosterone, and for women, we will see the hormonal milieu that is perimenopause. And those can certainly impact your overall metabolic health and what's going on. And we do see some internal health and hormone changes, but the good news is you can manage them. It's not, again, there's no black, white answer or light switch of on off. It's really just, okay, I'm experiencing some of these changes. What can I do personally to optimize my health with the tools that I have available, which would be things like sleep, exercise, stress management, nutrition. And I think you can still make the best of the situation. And there are some folks that may need some additional interventions on top of that, but there's certainly nothing that happens where you like wake up and you're 40 years and a day old and all of a sudden it's like, I can't burn fat anymore. That's just not, that's not the case.
Yeah. I'm really glad that you said that. I feel like that's still like one of the old ideologies that's still perpetuated, that, or in like certain doctors are still talking about it, or some people are convinced that, like you said, 40 years old in one day, it's like the metabolism switch literally got like metaphorically shut off and it's impossible or whatever. You know what I mean?
I think it may be harder for a lot of reasons. And from a marketing perspective, I think if it helps someone to seek out the coaching that they need, I can understand how you're appealing to certain frustrations that people may have, right? They feel stuck. They want to break through plateaus, but more often than not, there's more to the story. And even if it is, so for example, the average age of menopause is significantly after 40 years old. That would be very young still. Now that can lead to changes in insulin sensitivity. We may, we do have that decline in reproductive hormones that impacts our sleep. So there are changes that will happen as you continue to progress with age, where if it's throwing off your sleep, if it's throwing off your training or nutrition or your blood sugar regulation, those individual factors do compound and make a difference in your body composition, how you look in the mirror. But it's usually a progression of things leading up to that. And you can still do things both naturally, or if you were to seek out, like if you are trying to kind of optimize your health or your hormones, there are things that you can do. There are options available for people who are suffering from those symptoms. So I would still say, yeah, it's really not I tipped over the age of 40. It's going to be more related to either changes in your health or, changes in your lifestyle.
Are there any other major misconceptions around metabolism you think that most people will have either get totally wrong, like that, like the whole correlation does not equal causation, like with what we just talked about? But are there any other major misconceptions around the metabolism that you see a lot?
I think the biggest ones are just around, fast or slow, it's broken, I need to fix it. I think the biggest thing that I've tried to do in the industry as far as debunks and demystifying certain things is just explaining that metabolism is adaptive. And the sooner you can see it as this adaptive entity, and metabolism is really a reflection of your internal health and physiology. So if we want to better understand metabolism, we need to educate ourselves on our internal health, and physiology is basically just like a science word that speaks to a lot of those reactions and things that are going on, and chemical messengers like your hormones, that's related to that as well. So keeping it pretty simple, metabolism adapts to stimulus. And one thing that's really hard, especially for people who maybe didn't make the best choices for a while, is that whether you like it or not, whether you did it on purpose or unintentionally or intentionally, those choices, those behaviors did impact your metabolism. And the good news is, by changing those choices, by changing those behaviors, we can stimulate things like fat loss or muscle building, and our metabolism adapts to the new stimulus. So let's say I was doing a bunch of unhealthy things. I've got Dorito crumbs in my belly button. I'm sitting on the couch watching Netflix, and I haven't resistance trained in like 5 years. Or I talk about the good old days in high school and college, right? That food that I was eating was a stimulus, not necessarily a good one, but it was still something that was signaling my body to, basically act a certain way. And the lack of movement was also a lack of something can still lead the body to a negative adaptation. And so what we see a lot in our country is adaptation becomes dysfunction, dysfunction becomes disease. And that's where a lot of folks are suffering from things like metabolic syndrome, and they're very metabolically unhealthy. They're overweight. They're insulin resistant. They may be pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic. That's that progression of adaptation to dysfunction to disease. The good news is, if you're someone who's only in that situation where I've adapted, I've gained some weight, and I don't mean metabolic adaptation as in under eating. I mean, you're still adapting to the stimulus of more food. The good news is, by tracking your food or beginning to control your portions, eating protein, starting these behaviors, walking, resistance training, you are going to be amazed at what that bit of positive stimulus can do for you. So biggest thing, number one, first and foremost, metabolism is adaptive, and we play a very large role in terms of all of the decisions and choices we've made in our life will contribute to that metabolic status quo. And the good news is, you can play a role in changing it moving forward. What sucks about that is you have to take a level of personal responsibility where you're like, oh shit, like I actually did this. Now, the good news is, you are incredibly powerful to turn that thing around. And it may take a little bit longer than you would like, but far, far less than the time that you spent deviating from what was best. So really, we are powerful. We have the ability to choose. We can engage in the right things. We got to find out the right dose of those things for us. Like, my nutrition might not be the same as Jared, or the training routine that I follow might not be the same as his, and how we recover from that. But there are some universal, successful practices that we can follow to get in shape and to lose body fat and improve our body composition, get healthier, live longer, all of those things. So biggest word I would use is it's adaptive, which means it can change. It's malleable. It's not this fixed thing. It's not necessarily broken. You may be experiencing a poor state of health, or your lab work might not be perfect, or you may have some hormonal and metabolic changes, but more often than not, healthy lifestyle and making the right choices with our nutrition and training, it's like the most powerful drug that they just can't put in a bottle and sell. And the hardest thing is really you have to be consistent with it over a long time horizon.
I love that. That was so good. You actually answered the next thing I was going to ask you. Was going to ask you, what are some like simple, actionable things people can do right now to not just like, lose more weight and things like that, but do everything in a way that is beneficial to their metabolism. And I think you hit that nail on the head, unless there was anything else that you had.
It's simple, but it's not easy. You know, going for a walk is, you know, a relatively simple concept, but doing it every day, that consistency can be really hard. You know, resistance training, I think at first there's some challenge in learning how to do it, and it might be intimidating for some folks, but it isn't the craziest concept. I'm like, I pick things up and I put them down, right? Like, it's like not there's some complexity to exercise science, and certainly you can get into the nuance of the hypertrophy arguments that occur on the internet about like which movements are best to like grow your lower lats. But as far as like the basics of resistance training is not like the most intense, complicated concept. And the idea of eating nutrient dense, you know, single ingredient whole foods, getting our protein intake up, it's a simple concept. It's just, it's a lot harder. It's a lot easier said than done. Right. So when we think about that, we really have to start to think about like, okay, what are some things that I can do that are applicable to me in my situation that like I could show up and do for a long time. And some of the things too, you may not like be the biggest fan at first, and they'll grow on you over time, or you realize just how much added benefit they had in your life. And then all of a sudden something you weren't necessarily motivated to do all of a sudden becomes a lot more appealing, because you're like, man, you know, this really made a difference for me. So yeah, those would be the biggest things. I'd say it's not always necessarily easy, but it can be a little bit more simple than you think. Oftentimes when I see people who have hormonal and metabolic changes or gut health changes that are unfavorable, it's because rather than accepting that consistency over a long time horizon is incredibly important, they try to get fancy, or they go extreme, like with their diet. They go extreme dieting, extreme training. And when you go extreme with your training or your diet, it creates an additional stressor or body burden. And that is what drives additional dysfunction. So the people who are like, oh, you know, I have this thyroid issue, or, you know, low testosterone, cycle health issues for women. A lot of times the issues related to bloating or discomfort related to digestion, that's driven by sometimes we didn't accept the simple answer, and we were so like brute force, I am going to sledgehammer my way to this goal, that they just go crazy with like, okay, so a little bit of a deficit was good, so I'm going to slash my calories, or some training was good, so I'm going to train twice a day, every day, naturally, like without, you know, not necessarily what the Olympia level bodybuilders are doing. So that's the problem, is a lot of times in our industry, people, you know, see folks online, they want to look like that. And then all of a sudden, rather than having a degree of like persistence and patience that goes into that, we try to rush that solution by just turning up the intensity of successful things we're already doing. And then we're in a troublesome spot because we have the wrong dose of a good thing, right? Like water's good, but I can also drown in water. So there's like extremes to it, right? So the more we can kind of stay away from those extremes, take the right doses of the right things, you know, with our walking, our strength training, our nutrition, the more we avoid that severe dysfunction. And, you know, that's where like the power of the maintenance phase we talked about earlier is like pretty crazy when you actually are consistent with it over a period of time. And sure, if you want to go into a muscle building phase, do it. If you want to go into a fat loss phase, you can do it, but be respectful of your body in the way that you do it, and understand the quality of life indicators that are necessary, and also that are a great signal of your metabolic health. I think those would be kind of my big things. I realize I went a little beautiful. Bit
no, that was beautiful
on the last part, but it's something I just see a lot of in the industry. Yeah. I've been doing this for a long time, and there are folks who do have health issues that we certainly work with, and we're very sensitive to those situations. But sometimes people have created health issues from going extreme with their fitness, or severely subtracting their calories, or in the other direction, right? They maybe haven't accepted the basic answer of like, I do need to go for a walk today. Just little things like that can really, really make a difference.
No, absolutely. That's awesome, man. As we're wrapping up, I would love to hear anything you have on your book where people can find it and a little bit more about it and things like that.
Of course. So the book is called Metabolism Made Simple, Making Sense of Nutrition to Transform Your Metabolic Health. And you can learn more about it at metabolismmadesimple.com. I also link out to a lot of those resources on my personal website, which is sammillerscience.com. And the reason I created the book is because some of these concepts around dieting are fundamentally flawed. And there's either people attempt to create like this one size fits all approach, or they talk a lot about diets, but not a lot about nutrition. Which is where, so in this podcast episode, we talked about things like getting the appropriate vitamins and minerals or micronutrients that we need, with our nutrition. The concept of the food and energy that we're eating is, it should be like a gateway to our health, right? And a lot of times we get that mixed up in the health and fitness industry. So it's a book that can be used to change your body composition. It can be used to get healthier and live longer, or you can even use it if you're an athlete trying to improve your performance. And rather than like leaving reading the book with like a printout of like, these are the foods I need to eat, I try to give people frameworks and ways to critically think about nutrition in the diet industry and also think about exercise so that you can actually select the approach that's going to be best and most sustainable for you. Because a lot of us know these are some good things, right? Like that a training program might be good or walking might be good, but it's about kind of starting out and seeing how those things impact our metabolism and then carving out kind of the right mix for us, I think can go a really long way in improving our health. So that's why I created the book. It's something, when I started in the industry, I didn't necessarily know that I was going to do, but realized there was a need for it. And it's a great way to take a lot of the concepts I've developed over the years and really synthesize it and distill it into one piece of work that hopefully can be helpful for you.
I love that. We'll be definitely putting that in the, all that in the show notes. Is there anything else you're excited about right now that you're working on, or anything else like on the horizon that you're looking forward to?
Yeah, for sure. So I have a couple live events this fall. So one is for our students inside of Metabolism School. Those are health, fitness, nutrition professionals that we work with, and we're actually hosting them for a VIP event this weekend, which will be really cool.
Wow.
I am guest speaking at a men's health event and also a fitness business event later this year. So that is always a good time. I like connecting with other like-minded professionals. So lots of good stuff going on. And my dog turns 13. Well, I have two dogs. One of my dogs turns 13 in like 30 days. Wow. So we'll be celebrating pretty big over here because he's still kicking and having a good time. And then just rolling into the holidays, man. So I can't complain. I'm excited about a lot of stuff this time of year.
I love that. What kind of dogs do you have? So
I have a 18-month-old Corso puppy, and I have a 13-year-old rescue mix of just about any. I actually ran the DNA test on him, and he's like 10% of a whole bunch of different things, 5% this, 12% that. So he's a rescue. I've had him for a little over 12 years now. And it's cool because he's been here through this whole process of, building my business and the work that we do. And he's like, I posted the other day on social media. I was like, he's been putting up with my early mornings for, over a decade now. So he deserves some props.
That's right.
But yeah, two dogs. And that's always the hardest part about doing these events, right? Is like time away from them. So
we
big
have
dog
three.
guy.
I get it. We have three. I get it.
Okay, cool.
3 and no kids. So it's like the closest thing we have. All 3 are rescues, and it's, So as soon as someone starts talking about their dogs, I'm like, fuck metabolism and health stuff. Tell me about your puppies.
The other one was from the gym because I used to give her ice cubes. So they both kind of ended up like, it wasn't like I was like shopping around for a dog. One literally came home with me from the gym, and the other was like, and of course, like a 24-hour puppy trial, right? Like give someone a cute dog and be like, hey, see if you can manage to not adopt this dog, right? So as you can see, who won that situation, she picked me, and now I'm the one who, gets her treats and gets her food and all that good stuff. But she brings me a lot of joy. And then the older one was kind of an interesting situation, super sweet dog, but there are, in the area where I was living at the time, there were some kill shelters and stuff. And so I was fortunate enough to befriend some folks at an organization called Independent Animal Rescue. And I've been involved with a lot of the work that they do, and was able to rescue him and be a part of some of the work they were doing in the community. So definitely a big animal lover here. That. And plus too, there's like, we could even do a whole podcast about all the health benefits from pet ownership.
Bro, you're not even kidding. Like I've heard the joke. It's like, oh, if you wake up or if you feel like you have no purpose to get out of bed in the morning, just get a dog. And like it not shitting on the floor will get you out of bed on the mornings where you're depressed as fuck or whatever. So
yeah, I'm definitely a big believer, but you also get some, ideally you're walking your dog and you get some gut microbiome benefits, and, loneliness is really bad for your health. So having an animal can actually go a really long way in improving your mental and emotional health too.
Sure. I love it, man. This has been so good. I really appreciate you coming on. Is there anywhere else people can find you, like on social and stuff?
I'm just Sam Miller Science on all platforms, and my website is sammillerscience.com. I probably spend the most time on Instagram and my podcast, which is Sam Miller Science, but I'm everywhere. Like you can find Instagram, podcasts. I guess I technically have, Twitter, LinkedIn, all that good stuff. But yeah, you can just kind of start from the website. It'll lead you in all the different directions you want to go. And most of my work is put into the book and podcasts and things like that. So I appreciate you having me, Jared.
Yeah, man. I appreciate you being on here. We'll talk to you soon. Okay.
Talk soon.
All right. Peace. And we are back. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Dieting from the Inside Out. I know if you stuck around for the whole thing that you got a ton of value out of this. So what I want you to do is if this made sense and it resonated, I want you to shoot Sam a message. So we have all of his contacting info, all the stuff that he mentioned in the show notes. So be sure and go say what's up to him. Tell him that you heard him on the podcast and how much it was helpful to you, things like that. Now, before you go, I do have some other goodies for you. Number one is if you are not part of my free community and you don't have like a home base with all of this weight loss stuff, you'll want to go join my Facebook group. It's called Fat Loss Simplified. You can search that in Facebook or hit the link below, because the truth is you need a home base. Most people, half the reason they're struggling is because they don't have anyone like-minded. They're lost, they're alone. The husband doesn't get it. The kids don't care. And it's no wonder you sabotage and drift, which is why you need to get around the right people to be successful. So I have that for you, and it's totally free in a Facebook group. So please be sure and go join that if you aren't already. And then if you have not gone through my free course yet, I want to make sure that you are good to go on across everything, because I know how overwhelming firsthand. I remember when I was starting to do this weight loss stuff on my own back in the day, and it is hard to tell which way is up, and it's hard to tell what information is right or what's applicable to you. So it's why I created a free course called the Fat Loss Checklist. So be sure and go through that if you have not already. It's in the link below as well. And then finally, if you are tired of doing this on your own and you would like to have the support of a coach making all of this completely turnkey for you, where you just have to show up and execute and all your problems go away and you are given exact feedback every single week on what to do and held completely accountable, you can always apply for coaching. I do have a special link below, because you are a podcast listener. You go straight to the front of the line on the calendar, so we can make sure this is a good fit. Otherwise, that's it. Be sure and subscribe if you have not already to the show. I love you. I appreciate you. And I will talk to you next week.